Hello everyone and welcome to C and C++ tutorials for machine learning, robotics, and control engineering. In this tutorial, I will address one very important question. Namely, the question is, what is the difference between function declaration and definition in C and C++? But before I start with explanations, I need to mention the following. I often find myself mixing these two things. That is, I often say declaration while I mean definition, or I say definition while I mean declaration. In fact, definition is at the same time declaration and definition of the body of the function. Okay, at the end of this video tutorial, we will also explain the best practices. So let's start immediately. Now, let me ask you a question. Is this a function, definition, or declaration? Over here, I have a function called SumVariables. It accepts two parameters or two input arguments, a and b, and returns an integer, and here's the body of the function. Now, is this definition or declaration? Well, this is actually a definition of the function. And you will see later on that the definition of a function contains at the same time the declaration and the definition of the body of the function. So let's start with the declaration of functions in C and C++. The function declaration is used to provide the compiler with the following information about the function. And here you should be very careful and carefully try to understand everything. First of all, we need to provide the name of the function. The declaration of the function specifies the name of the function that the compiler needs to know. Okay, so the name, number one. Number two, the number of input arguments or parameters that the function accepts and the data types of the input arguments or the parameters. In addition, in the declaration of a function, we can also specify the names of the parameters or the names of the input arguments. And then, the declaration of the function should contain also the data type of the return variable or return object of a function. So this is very important. We need to specify the name, the number of input arguments, and the data types of the input arguments. We don't need to actually specify the names of the parameters or input arguments. We can leave it as it is. And at the end, we need to specify the data type of the return variable or return object of a function. Okay, so function declaration is the information that the compiler needs to have in order to accept the references to the declared identifier or to declared function. Also, function declarations declare the name of the function and characteristics. However, function declaration do not allocate the storage memory for that particular function. And that's the main definition, actually main difference between function definition and declaration. The declaration of a function do not allocate the memory for the variables that are used in that function. Okay, so here are the declarations of several functions. So when you see something like this in the code, you immediately know that that's the declaration. Here we have integer, return type, name of the function, and two input parameters, a and b of the data type integer. Then we have a float. Name of the function is max value, and the two input parameters are of the type float. Over here you can see a function that accepts as an input argument string and doesn't return anything. And over here you can see that we can specify a function that only specify the data types of the input parameters, however, it doesn't specify the names. And some people like to leave it like this. They just say, okay, this function will accept pointers to integers and float pointer. That's it. Next, we explain the concept of defining a function in C and C++. The function definition implements or instantiates the function. That is, the function definition at the same time declares and defines the function. Again, that is, at the same time, it contains a declaration and the body of the function that defines the function. The function declaration also allocates the memory storage for that function. This means that the memory storage for the function variables is reserved by defining the function. And let's go over several examples of defining functions. Okay, so here is a definition of the function called SUMVariables. This function returns an integer, and over here we see that the input parameters are of the type integer. They're int a and int b. And over here we specify the name a and b. And you need to do that in the function definition. And here's the body of the function. We declare c. Note that in c, that is this line, is not the definition, is actually a declaration of the variable c. And over here we return c is equal to a plus b, and over here we define c and return c. Okay, so here is a definition of the function called maxValue. The function declaration is actually this first line. This function returns float and accepts two parameters of the type float. Then we have a simple if statement. If a is greater than or equal to b, we return a, otherwise we return b. Now, what is very important to observe about these two examples is that the definition of the function contains two things. Contains a declaration of the function, this is the first line, and the body of the function. The body of the function actually defines the function. To repeat, the function definition is actually composed of declaration line and the body of the function. We can avoid separate declarations and instead declare and define the functions at the same time. That is, you don't need to declare that int SUMVariable is actually existing. You can just define it, and in this definition you can declare it. Okay, here's some important comments regarding function declarations and definitions and some best practices. A function can be declared several times in the program. However, it should be defined only once. The function declarations should be compatible. However, try to avoid this unless you use some type of function overloading. So my advice is, if you're not planning to use function overloading, don't declare several times at the same time. Don't avoid that. Next, in complex C or C++ projects, declarations should be placed in header files that usually have extensions .h or .hpp, and note that the header files are actually not compiled. They're actually just copy and pasted in some other code together with the source file, and definitions should be placed in the source file or in the implementation files that usually have extensions .c or .cpp. Next, in smaller projects, it's a good practice to declare functions above the main function and then below the main function to define that function. This makes the code file better organized and easier to read. Okay, so in the sequel, let's go over several examples and let's implement them in C++, explaining these best practices. Okay, so here's the first example that illustrates some practices. So over here you can see a not so good practice of defining and declaring the functions. So what's happening over here? We're including the input-output stream, we're including the cstdlib, and then we're using the namespace std. Over here on the top of the main function, that is above the main function, we define and declare the function called SUMVariables. And here it is. Now, and then imagine that you are doing this not only for a single function, but you're doing this for hundreds of functions, right? Then what will happen is that your code will become very messy. That is, it's not going to be organized well, and you will have to scroll for who knows how many lines in order to come to your main function, right? In that case, you would probably even leave just the declaration in this file and include from some other file the complete definition. However, let's stick to this case. So how can we improve this code to make it more readable and more concise? Well, instead of doing this, right, instead of doing something like this, we can do something else. But before we explain that, let's simply run this code and let's see what is the output. Over here you can see the output is 30, right? Because over here we are simply calling the SUMVariables function, and you can see the complete code. Okay, so let's improve this code. So how to improve? Here's the improvement. Now look what I did over here. Over here, this part is the same. Then look what I did. I just declared the function some variables int a, int b. Even better, you can do something like this. So you can leave this out, right? To make the code more readable. Now if someone is reading your code or revising your code, he or she can immediately say, aha, okay, I know that over here there is a function called some variables and here is the declaration. And the only thing that I need in order to use this function is to know only that I have two input parameters that are type int, and that's it. I'm not interested about particular implementation, definition. I should say I'm not interested about the definition as a user of this code. I just need this information that tells me everything about this function. And then I know how to use this function. I will simply define, this is the definition, define two variables of the type int, and I will simply print out their sum by calling this function and using cout. That's it. And then over here below the main function, here is the definition of the complete function. And someone who wants to improve your code will actually maybe change this definition. However, the user just using this code will be interested in this. And over here before the main function, you can even add 50 declarations that are only one single line long, and that's it. And the code is much more readable and much better organized.